Good morning, everyone. My name is Ahmed Sheikh. I'm from Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, and I'm going to be assisting you with mathematics. Today's topic would be a continuation of last week's lesson, which is statistics, and we're going to be focusing on measures of dispersion. Our lesson objectives are to determine percentiles, quartiles, interquartile, and semi-interquartile range. Also, to understand the above measures of dispersion. Okay, what we're going to be doing in our lesson today, the first thing is we're going to answer the exercises from the previous lesson so that learners may do their corrections. And number two, we're going to focus on the measures of dispersion. Now, this can be further broken down. As we can see, the first measure of dispersion is the range. Some learners would be familiar with the range, but we would explain that further. Quartiles, there's three quartiles which we're going to be focusing on, which is the lower quartile, labeled as Q1, the median, labeled as Q2, and the upper quartile, labeled as Q3. We're then going to be working with percentiles, which simply means percentages, but I will elaborate on that further. Then we have the interquartile range and the semi-interquartile range. The teaching methods which I'm going to be using today is the narrative method, question and answer, and a demonstration. Basically, I'm going to be working with examples to make you understand the section a little bit easier. Also uploaded a worksheet for you guys, the worksheet that I'm going to be working with, and you can download that as well. Also put together two videos from YouTube, which are helpful in understanding measures of dispersion a little better. Okay, let's continue with today's lesson. Okay, we're looking at last week's exercise. I'm going to start with number one. It says the average length of a banana is represented below in the table. We've got average length in millimeters. We've got 4 intervals. And the frequency that occurred between 0 and 50 was 6. The next interval, they had a frequency of 10, and so on. Let's read the questions and let's see what the answers should look like. 1.1, draw a histogram to represent the data in the table. Okay, so I've already made up a template here. All we're going to do is we're going to enter our values into the histogram. Let's look at our first interval. We've got from 0 less than equals to x, which is less than 50. And we had a frequency of 6 occurring in that interval. So I'm going to highlight from 0 to 6. Let's choose red. That looks nice. Okay, and that is my first bar of my histogram. Okay, let's look at our second interval. We have from 50 less than equals to x, which was less than 100, and they had a frequency of 10. So let's highlight from 0 to 10. Let's choose another color. Yellow. Okay. Our third interval, from 100 less than equals to x less than 150, we had a frequency of 9 occurring in that interval. So we're going to highlight from 0 to 9. And let's choose green. Okay, and our last interval, we had from 150 less than equals to x, which is less than 200, and we had a frequency of 5 in that column. So we're going to highlight from 0 to 5. And let's choose blue. I think blue is nice. Okay, and that should be a histogram. Hopefully yours looks the same. If not, please look at where you went wrong and try and correct that. 1.2, calculate the mean length of a banana, make use of a table. If we remember from last week's lesson, in order for us to calculate the mean of grouped data, we had to add 2 more columns, which was going to be the midpoint column, and the last column was going to be the frequency times midpoint. Now, I've already made up my template for that, and I've put up all the necessary values. We're going to work it out and work out our okay, so we're looking at the midpoint of the first interval. We're going to start with 0. That's our first value in the interval, and the last value was 50. Let's put that into our calculator and work out our answer. 0 plus 50 equals 2. Okay, looking at last week's lesson, question 1 said that the average length of a banana is represented below in the table. So we have a table here, and it gives us the average length in millimeters. That data is separated into 4 intervals. Our first interval is from 0 less than equals to x, which is less than 50. And we had an occurrence of 6 frequent values in that interval. In our second interval, we had 50 less than equals to x, which is less than 100, and we had a frequency of 10. Our third interval, we had 100 less than equals to x, which is less than 150, and that gave us a frequency of 9. And the last interval was 150 less than equals to x, which is less than 200, and we had a frequency of 5. So let's look at the questions based on this table. Number 1.1 asks us to draw a histogram to represent the data in the table. Okay, so I've made up a template already, and we're going to enter our frequency values into our histogram bars. And our first interval is from 0 less than equals to x, which is less than 50, and it had a frequency of 6. So I'm going to go and highlight from 0 to 6. Let's make that red. Okay, our second interval was from 50 less than equals to x, which was less than 100, and we had a frequency of 10. So I'm going to go to my second interval and 0 to 10. Let's make that yellow. Our third interval, we had from 100 less than equals to x, which was less than 150, and we had a frequency of 9. So we're going to highlight from 0 to 9. Let's make that green. And the last interval, which was 150, which is less than equals to x, less than 200, and that had a frequency of 5. So I'm going to highlight from 0 to 5. And let's make that blue. And that should be your histogram for 1.1. Okay, let's look at 1.2. 1.2 says to calculate the mean of the length of a banana and make use of the table. We remember from last week's lesson, in order for us to calculate the mean, we have to add 2 more columns to our table. And the next the column next to our frequency column is going to be our midpoint column. And next to that is going to be our frequency times midpoint. Now again, I've already made up the template. So this is what your table is supposed to look like. So if you're looking at our midpoint column, in order to work out our midpoint column, you're going to take the first value of the interval and add your second value of the interval and divide it by 2. So let's do that and work out our answers. So I've got 0 plus 50 divided by 2. And let's put that into our calculators. And that equals to 25. Let's look at our next interval. And we have our first value of 50. Our second value is 100. Let's enter that into our calculator. And that gives us an answer of 75. Okay, our third interval. We have our first value, which is 100, plus our second value, which is 150. Let's work that out. That gives us an answer of 125. If we look at our last interval, our first value is 150, plus our second value is 200. Let's calculate that. 150 plus 200 divided by 2, and it gives us an answer of 175. Okay, so we are ready to enter our values into our frequency times midpoint. We do have our frequency and we do have our midpoint. Let's do our first interval. The frequency was 6. The midpoint that we calculated was 25. Okay, let's enter all our values and then we can calculate our answers after we complete entering our frequency times midpoints. Okay, so we got our next interval. Our frequency was 10. Our midpoint calculation was 75. Our third interval, the frequency was 9, and our midpoint calculation was 125. Our fourth interval, we had a frequency of 5, and we have a midpoint calculation of 175. Okay, so let's work out our frequency times midpoint column answers. Our first calculation would be 6 times 25, and that gives, 6 times 25, and that gives us 150. Second calculation is going to be 10 times 75, and that equals to 750. Our third calculation is 9 times 125, that equals to 1125. And our last answer there is going to be 5 times 175, and that gives us 875. Okay. So let's work out our total of our frequency times midpoint column. We've got 100 150 plus 750 plus 1125 plus 875. And that gives us a total of 2,900. Okay, we also need to know what's our total of our frequency column in order to work out our mean. So let's calculate that. We've got 6 plus 10 plus 9 plus 5. And that tells us that there are 30 values in our data set. Now to work out the estimated mean, it's going to be the total of your frequency times midpoint column, which is 2,900, and divided by the number of data values, or in this case, the total of our frequency column, which is 30. Let's calculate that. 2,900 divided by 30. That gives us 96.67. If we're rounding it up to 2 decimal places. And that should be your answer. Okay, so we're looking at 1.3. 1.3 says draw a frequency polygon on the histogram of 1.1. Okay, so they want us to draw a frequency polygon on this histogram. If you can recall from last week's lesson, a frequency polygon is basically the center of the top of each bar in your histogram. You're going to be joining them and bringing your lines back down to the bottom corners of each bar on each end. Okay, so let's do that. So if I'm looking at this, that should be the center of the top. It's gonna go till there. Let's make that black so it's easier for us to see. Okay, let's do our next point. So we're going to insert a line again. It's going to be from the top, and we're going to join it to, we're going to join it to that line as well. Let's make it a little bit weightier. And that should be your second line in your frequency polygon. Okay, so we're going to join our top of our third bar to the top of our second bar. That should be somewhere in the center. Let's make it a little thicker, the line. And that should be your third line. If we're joining our third bars to our fourth bar, so we're gonna insert another line. And it's gonna be from the center of the top, joining the center of the third intervals. Let's make that a little bigger as well. And lastly, we're gonna join our last bars center to the bottom corner. Let's make that a little bigger as well. And that should be your frequency polygon. Remember, we're going to find the center of the top of each bar, and we're going to plot a point, and we're going to join each point to each other. And lastly, join your first bar's center to the bottom and your last bar center to the bottom corner as well. And that should be your frequency polygon. Okay, that was 1.3. 1.4, determine the median class of the length of a banana. Now, when we were working with a median in ungrouped data, we use the scratch method. When it comes to group data, it would be easier to use the formula, which is the median is equal to n plus 1. We've already established that there's 30 data values in the set. So it's going, n is equal to 30. Let's enter that. 30 plus 1 over 2. And let's calculate that. And that gives us an answer of 15,5. Now, in order for us to establish where the median is going to lie, or in which interval it's going to lie, we need to establish where 15 is going to be. Is it going to be in the first interval? Is it going to be in the second interval, third interval, or fourth interval? So in order to establish that, we're going to add. Obviously, 15 is more than 6, so it's not going to be in the first interval, but 6 plus 10 is equal to 16. And 15 is less than 16. So it would have to be in the second interval. Therefore, it's 50 less than equals to x, which is less than 100. So that means that the median class of this data set is going to lie in the interval of 50 less than equals to x, which is less than 100. Lastly, 1.5 says, write down the model class of the length of a banana. Looking at the model class, again, model class simply means the mode, the highest frequency compared to all the other. And we can see that the second interval has a frequency of 10, which is much greater than the remainder of the values. Therefore, our model class is also going to be in the interval of 50 less than equals to x, which is less than 100. The greatest frequency was 10, and we said it was the same interval. And that was question 1 complete. Let's look at question 2. The following data details the ages of kids who went on a school trip to the museum in July and the September holidays. Okay, so we've got our data broken up into 4 intervals. Remember, we've got 2 sets of data here. We've got July's data and we've got September's data. So it says 2.1, draw a bar diagram to represent both sets of data. above. Now, coming back to a bar diagram, we need to keep in mind that a bar diagram is very similar to a histogram. Though a bar diagram is separated by spaces, and a histogram, if we can go back to question 1.1, it has no spaces in between each bar, whereas a bar graph is going to have a space between each bar. I've already made up the template for you guys. So let's enter our bar information into okay, let's look at July first. So we've got the first interval, which is 4 less than equals to x, which is less than 7, and we have a frequency right. So we've got a frequency of 5. So let's go and enter that into our. So July, I've allocated red for July so we don't confuse ourselves. Okay, so I've entered my y-axis in intervals of 2. Now, I've separated this column so that we can see that is 5. Chosen the color red. Sorry. We're going to highlight from 0 to 5. And we said we're going to choose red for July. Okay, let's look at our second frequency. We have from 7 less than equals to x, which is less than 10, and we have a frequency of 8. So here, we're going to go all the way to 8 and highlight. Our second frequency given to us, is 7. So again, here, and that is what our bar should look like. And our last frequency for the interval 13 less than equals to x, which is less than 16, has a frequency of 10. So let's go and highlight from 0 to 10. We said red for July. Okay, we're done with our July bars. Let's look at our September bars. And the first interval, the frequency for 4 less than equals to x, which is less than 7, has a frequency of 10. So I said we'll use green for September. So let's highlight it first and change our color after. Okay, and that is what your bar should look like. Let's look at our next interval. we have 7 less than equals to x less than 10, and it had a frequency of 11. Let's split that first. Okay, so 11 should be there. And that is what your second bar should look like. Looking at our third interval for September, we have a frequency of 16. So I'm going to go from 0 and highlight all the way to 16 in green. And that should be your third bar. And your last bar has a frequency of 4. So I'm going to go from 0 to 4 and highlight it in green. And that is what your bar diagram should look like for 2.1. 2.2, draw a frequency table of the kids that went to the museum. Okay, so that requires us to add our 2 more columns, which I've done already. Let's input our values and work out our answers. So our first midpoint given to us is 4. It's going to be plus 7 divided by 2. Let's enter all our values. We can work out our answers afterwards. Our second interval, the first value is 7. Second value is 10. The next interval, our first value was 10 and our second value was 13. Our fourth interval, our first value 13 and our second value 16. Okay, let's work out our answers. So we've got 4 plus 7 divided by 2, and that gives us a frequency of 5,5. Our second answer is going to be 7 plus 10 divided by 2, and that gives us an answer of 8,5. Our third interval's midpoint is going to be 10 plus 13 divided by 2, and it gives us an answer of 11,5. And our last interval's midpoint is going to be 13 plus 16 divided by 2, and it gives us an answer of 14,5. Lastly, let's work out our frequency times midpoint column. Our frequency for the first interval was 5, and our answer from the midpoint calculation was 5,5. Again, let's input all our values and we can work out our answers afterward. Our frequency for the second interval, we had 8, and we have a midpoint of 8,5. Our third interval, we had a frequency of 7, and we had a midpoint of 11,5. And the last interval, we had a frequency of 10 and a midpoint of 14, okay, let's calculate our answers. So we got 5 times 5,5, and that gives us 27,5. Looking at our next frequency times midpoint, we have 8 times 8,5. That gives us an answer of 68. Looking at our third interval, we have 7 times 11,5, and that gives us an answer of 80,5. And our last calculation there would be 10 times 14, 10 times 14,5, which is 145. Okay, and that was it. We can, it's not necessary because we were not asked to work out. Okay, we are going to be asked to work out the mean, so let's do it one time. So if we have to add our frequency times midpoint answers, we should have 27,5 plus 68 plus 80,5 plus 145, and that gives us a total of 321. And if we look at our frequency, we have to add that. Remember, it's going to be our frequency times midpoint divided by our total of the frequency in order to work out the mean. So we've got 5 plus 8 plus 7 plus 10, and that tells us that there's 30 values in that data set. 2.3 says determine the modal class of both buzzers during the holidays. So if I'm looking at the highest frequency in the July column, and I can see it's 10 and it's in the last interval. So let's do the July one first. So the greatest frequency there is 10, and we said it was in the last interval. Okay, and let's look at September. It has 16, which is in the second last interval. That is the highest frequency in the September column. So let's enter our value 16, and let's enter our interval. It's the second last one, which was 10. Less than equals to X, which is less than 30. And that is our answer for the modal class for July and September. 2.4 says to calculate the mean age of the kids that went to the museum during the holiday. Lucky for us, we've calculated already the total of the frequency times midpoint and the frequency column, the July frequency column. So let's input our values and find out what our mean is equal to. So we've got 321, and we've got 30 values. Let's put that into our calculators. 321 divided by 30, and that tells us that 10,7 is our estimated mean. Okay. I think this is the last question from the exercise. It says determine the median class of both buzzers during the holidays. Okay, so we've already worked out the total of the July frequency, which was 30. Remember, n is 30. So let's input that into our formula. We've got 30 plus 1 divided by 2. 30 plus 1 divided by 2, and that tells us it's 15,5. Add, okay, let's calculate the median of the next September frequency. Let's calculate that quickly. So we got 10 plus 11 plus 16 plus 4. And that tells us that there's 41 data values there. So n is equal to 41. Let's calculate that quickly. 41 plus 1 divided by 2, and that's 21. Now, let's go and see where 15.5 lies. Looking at this, 5 plus 8 is going to be 13, and 13 plus 7 is 20. So it tells us that it's going to lie in the interval 10 less than equals to x, which is less than 13. And let's look at where 21 lies in the frequency column for September. 10 plus 11 is 21. It tells us it lies in the second interval. 7 less than equals to x, which is less than 10. Okay, and that was the median class for July, and that was the median class for September. Okay, it seems as if we do not have enough time, so we're going to wrap this session up. We are going to be continuing with measures of dispersion in the next session, which will entail working with separating the data set into different parts. We will elaborate further on that in the next lesson. I'd like to thank you on my behalf.